Hello and welcome to the show. My guest today is American, but was born in Czechoslovakia back in the 1930s. In 1939, aged 4, Eve Slatner was separated from her parents and put on a so-called Kindertransport, a train to England which saved her from the concentration camps. Later reunited with her parents in the UK, they emigrated to America after the war. There she became an opera singer and actress, specialising in Brecht. And it was this fascination with Bertolt Brecht that first brought her to Berlin in the 1950s. Welcome to the show.
Thank you.
You have an extraordinary story from your childhood of escaping National Socialism. Your mum and dad did as well, as I mentioned, but a lot of your family didn't. And I want to talk about this extraordinary story a little later, but first ask you about coming here as a young woman in the 1950s. We mentioned Brecht, but what possessed you to come to Germany?
Well, it might sound really weird today. I was working in Rep in England. It was a terrible company. It was in Wales. It was terrible. The director was awful. And one night, our only day off, I happened to watch television in the digs that I was in and saw Kenneth Tynan, who had just come back from Berlin and raved and raved and raved. The Berliner Ensemble, forget British theatre, it's nowhere. It's
Kenneth Tynan, I should say, was a famous critic and writer.
And he was my absolute god.
Yeah.
And I was so unhappy in the company. And I thought, if you stay here, weekly Rep, you know, you're working so hard that
this is repertory theatre, which you change shows every night.
Every week, yes.
Every week. Yeah, sorry.
So in the evening, you're doing this week's show, and during the day, you're already rehearsing next week's show.
Yeah.
So, and if you don't have a good company and a good director, it becomes very superficial. And the way you do when you're 21, 22, I thought, oh, God, if I stay here, I'm going to become a hack actress. I have to go to Berlin. I have to see the Berliner Ensemble. Kenneth Tynan is right. And that's actually why I came.
Yeah. And you came here to see Brecht. I mean,
Brecht's plays. He had been dead for 2 years, unfortunately.
Yeah. But the Berliner Ensemble, now, I'm thinking the 1950s, so you were, this was in the East...
It was in the East.
East Germany.
But there was no war.
But this was before the war came up.
Yes.
So what was it like?
Fabulous.
Yeah.
Fabulous.
Yeah.
First of all, you could change money 1 to 4. So I had loads of money. So I bought, I think, every book, every record that was ever produced on Brecht and by Brecht. I have everything. Yeah. Then I was going to rehearsals every day. And I must say, Helene Weigel was so wonderful. She welcomed, you know, I came very shy, not such good German, saying, do you think I could possibly watch rehearsals? Of course, you know, you must. Brecht said everybody could watch rehearsals. She was so lovely. And it was fabulous.
Another, if I may say, extraordinary thing about you coming to Berlin is on the first day you arrived in Berlin,
yes.
I know that you met a man who later became your husband,
yes.
a German.
Yes.
And you've been married for 52 years. So
yes.
Tell us about that.
Well, of course, I didn't know that one day I'd marry. I didn't even know I'd ever see him again. We met in front of the Mensa of the FU.
This is the Free University.
Yes.
And the canteen.
An American student, when I rang the bell there, opened the door. And I said in lousy German, you know, would it be possible to have a room here? Because it was August, I figured all the students are gone. And he right away said, you can speak English to me, and I can imagine how terrible you feel your first minute in Berlin. I felt wonderful. The sun was shining, it had rained all the time in England, and I felt wonderful. And he said, let me take you out for lunch first. And in front of the Mensa was Eckhart chaining up his bike, and we were introduced. And he thought I was some stupid American who really shouldn't be bothering with Brecht. What
did you think of him? Was he a stupid German?
No, I didn't think he was a stupid German, but I didn't even think of him. I didn't think I'd ever see him again.
Yeah.
And And I wouldn't have, except the next day I was walking down the street, and who should come riding by on his bike but Eckhart. So he said hello, and I still didn't have a place to stay, so I couldn't give him a phone number. And then we said goodbye, and that was that. Then I met him again, and by then I had a phone number. So I gave him my phone number, and he said he was leaving for West Germany to visit his folks, but he would call me when he got back.
Which he did.
Which he did.
And, yes, okay.
The rest is history.
And he took this extraordinary photo, if I may say so, which you sent us. This is a photo from 1958.
Yes.
Tell us about this photo.
Well, I had just come out of a movie house on whatever the street is that comes after Uhlandstrasse.
Well, of the Kudamm, which is a sort of main drag of West
Yes.
Berlin then. Yeah,
and we saw The Great Dictator with Charlie Chaplin. I don't remember him taking this picture, but he must have had a camera on him and taken the picture.
Yeah. And actually, in the right-hand side of the picture, it's actually got an advert for the Nuremberger Prozess, the Nuremberg trials. I thought that might have been the film that you went to see, because that's obviously a very significant film to do with history as well. And I know it was some time after the war, but it was when a lot of people really, through that movie, found out what had really gone on, isn't it? But on the other hand, having seen The Great Dictator, that's quite interesting too. Anyway, the other day, our reporter, Torsten, went with Eve Slatner to look at that, for that very cinema. Let's see if they both found it.
This was the cinema, right there. You can see it's still a very fancy entrance, even though it's now, unfortunately, Tommy Hilfiger. I remember the cases, but I think most of them had film posters in them. Oh, very nice. Oh, wow, this is really nice. What I love about the Stolperstein is they commemorate everybody who was killed by the Nazis, whether they were Jews, Sinti Roma, homosexuals. You come across them by chance, you almost step on them, and then you see the names of an entire family, children that weren't even 10 who were murdered. Nothing can compare with it. I mean, just look, born in 1935, killed in Minsk in 1941, 6 years old. And these are the grandparents, these are the parents. I mean, how could that have happened? I must say, I am impressed that Germany does so much to remember the Holocaust. I mean, there are monuments all over the place. Even though I don't find this a particularly well thought through monument, I'm still, I just get so emotional when I see something like this or talk about the Kindertransport that I'm really no good. If I hadn't got on the Kindertransport, I would be dead now. My parents managed to come to London, and actually my aunt, my father's sister, and my cousin. Everybody else was killed. Everybody.
It's obviously very moving for you. You say the rest of your family were killed. We also saw you there looking at what are called the Stolpersteine, the stumbling blocks could be a translation. I mean, we should explain those a little more. These are little things in the street where people lived, and they're all over Germany, aren't they? Yeah.
No, I must say I have great respect for the Germans that they do this. I mean, they're all over. Sometimes you walk down a street and there are really dozens and dozens of them.
And it's your favourite memorial, if you like.
Yes.
You don't like some of the memorials, I believe.
No, I don't.
No.
No, but I feel this, you come across them by chance, you read the names, you realise there were people living here, there were people living there. It's just really wonderful.
And in fact, they're not just in Germany, because you very kindly sent us this photo, which I want to show now. And if people can see that, it says Emily Slatnerova, and I can't see the other one, you tell me.
Sophie Slatnerova. Sophie.
And these are now in the Czech Republic.
Yes.
Is this, and you've been involved, I believe.
Yes, they're in Ostrava, which is one of the major cities in Moravia.
Yeah.
And, but there are about maybe 50 or 60 in Ostrava, not just my family, but other families.
Did you actually apply for the Stolperstein?
Yes.
I mean, how does it all happen?
That's how it works.
Yeah?
You apply, you get all the permissions from whatever country you want them laid in, and you give the dates, date of birth, date of deportation, and date of being murdered. And then Günther Demnig, the artist whose baby this is, checks on his schedule when he'll be in that area, and then he notifies you.
I see this man, Günther Demnig himself, makes them, and...
He's incredible. He used to even engrave them. Now he has an engraver. But he goes to all of these places, really godforsaken places, hammers into the ground, puts them in, comes with everything. I mean, they offered him water for the cement. He had it with him. He had everything. It took him, to lay the 2 stones that he laid last week, took him maybe 5 minutes. It's unbelievable.
Yeah, you were there just recently,
yes.
As you said. You have said you're not so keen on other memorials, but you did mention the fact that the Germans have dealt with the past so well. And, how does that show itself in your view? I think it's important to ask you this.
Well, I must say I have great respect for them. The Stolpersteiner, I think, in a way, are the biggest sort of slap in the face, if you like. But there are ordinary citizens who polish them. You know, if they've been laid in front of their houses, they go and polish them. I think this is absolutely amazing.
And it's a fabulous memorial. Yeah. Let's go back to the beginning. I mentioned you were on a Kindertransport at the age of 4. Well, we all know memory at that time. What do you remember actually about it? I mean, do you remember that you got separated from your parents?
No. I don't remember that I got separated. I don't remember how we got to Prague, because we weren't living in Prague, and that's where the transport left. It's all been repressed. I mean, it's not a question of my memory, not It's really been so repressed that the only thing I remember, which is sort of the least important, when we got off the train in Holland and got onto the boat, I was sitting on a bench on deck, and somebody came and sat next to me, a lady, who had nothing to do with this. She must have been Dutch. And she sat on the edge of my coat. And I was so affronted, I jumped up and pulled my coat away and gave her glared at her. And that's what I remember. And strangely enough, I mean, I've done much worse things in my life. I feel very guilty about that. I wish I could meet her and just tell her.
Well, I think it's quite understandable. There you were, a child, very alone, no parents around. I mean, do you have any memory of, where did you think the train was going?
I mean, now, in hindsight, I must have known that it was going to London and that I was going to live with the Russells. That I must have known.
And the Russells are?
The Russells were friends of my parents. He used to be an actor, and like most actors, he had to earn a living teaching English with Berlitz. And he was living with his Czech wife and daughter in this very nice town that my parents lived in. And he used to teach my parents English, and my father, who was a dentist, in exchange, fixed his teeth, or fixed the whole family's teeth. So that's how they knew each other. And when things got really terrible, they must have suggested that they would take me to London.
And is this the...
Yes.
This is the Russell family?
That's Mr. Russell on, I guess, your left. Mrs. Russell is next to him. And his sister, that very English-looking skinny lady, that's his sister. And then I'm the one in the front, and behind me is Evelyn, their daughter, who I'm still very close to and visit once a year when I go to London.
And I think this is...
yes,
there's a picture of the two of you.
Yes.
This is you there.
Yes.
And
and that must have still been in Czechoslovakia.
Oh, really?
Yes.
This picture's in Czechoslovakia?
I think.
Yeah.
Yes, definitely, because it's in the album that my parents brought from Czechoslovakia.
Yeah. And happy times? I mean, were you happy there with them, or...?
Sorry to say that I wasn't.
No?
You know, I hardly spoke English. Or, OK, she could speak Czech. But I felt I would never see my parents again. And I must have cried non-stop.
Yeah. And you were locked in the attic?
I guess I got on Mrs. Russell's nerves because she was alone in the house with me all day. Everybody else, Evelyn was at school and Mr. Russell was wherever. And it got on her nerves and she would just lock me in the attic, which of course made me cry and scream even more. But...
And your parents did manage to get to England.
They did.
And find you. Do you know how that came about at all?
I'm so sorry that I don't. I'm so sorry that I never asked them, never said, you know, how did you get out? With Persian carpets, I should add, and their silverware, and paintings that weren't worth anything, but they were just sentimental paintings that they had hanging in there.
But you did get out.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I never asked
them. They did get out, yeah. But it was something they never talked about as well, perhaps?
They never talked about it. And frankly,
that
I think I didn't want to know. Because I had made up a little story that I was on the Kindertransport with Mrs. Russell accompanying me. That was sort of palatable. The idea of this 4-year-old, and I wasn't the youngest, there were babies on board, with no adult. I couldn't live with that.
Yeah. There's one more picture I want to show too now, and this is if I can get it, yes. This is in England, though.
Oh, yes.
And this is at a school for Czech girls. Is that
it was
right?
a boarding school that was started by the wife of the then president of Czechoslovakia, because there were so many Czech kids in England that they were afraid that when the war ends and we all go back, we wouldn't have any idea about anything, including the language. We wouldn't speak Czech anymore. So they opened up this school. Actually, there were 3 schools, depending on which age group you were in. And we had a whole Czech program.
OK. I want to ask you now about Sir Nicholas Winton. Sir Nicholas Winton, we should explain, is the man... He's been called, actually, the British Schindler.
Yes.
He was the man who got all these children, 669 children in the end, on board a number of trains. I mean, this is a few weeks before the war began from an English point of view.
Yes.
I mean, the Germans had already entered Czechoslovakia.
Exactly.
Yeah. And how did you find out about this man? Because nobody really knew about him after the war.
Well, no. And he never told the story. Even his wife didn't know. His wife went up to the attic and opened a suitcase and found a box with all these letters and the list of the children and the permission, where they were going to go to, the permission from the Home Office. And he was invited to This Is Your Life, that television program.
In England,
yeah.
yeah. This is, by the way, this is in the 1980s, I believe.
Yes,
yeah.
yes.
He'd never told even his wife.
Isn't it amazing?
He'd been, I believe, an industrialist or a businessman.
No, he was a stockbroker.
And he'd been in Czechoslovakia.
No, he was in England, and he was planning to go skiing for Christmas, which he did every year. He was actually what today would be called a yuppie. He was well off. He was a stockbroker. He had a very nice life. And a friend of his sent him a telegram and said, forget skiing. You must come to Czechoslovakia. Nothing is being done for the children. We have to do something.
Yeah.
So he cancelled his skiing trip, went to Czechoslovakia, and immediately started organizing, went back to England, to the Home Office, and knocked on doors and said, you must do something, you must do something. And then he went to all these English families and got there and showed them pictures of these children. And they could choose who they wanted. They had to pay £50, which at that time was a lot of money. I mean, England was not well off. Mm. And he managed to get, I think, 699 children out and settled. Unfortunately,
the last train didn't leave. Anyway, Sir Nicholas Winton has now reached the grand old age of 105. And 5 years ago, on September in 2009, he was witness to a unique occasion when a very special steam train set off from Prague in the Czech Republic on a 4-day journey to London.
A vintage train sets off, retracing a historic journey that saw the rescue of hundreds of children from the then Nazi-occupied country 70 years before. The commemorative train is following in the tracks of Sir Nicholas Winton, for whom a memorial statue was unveiled before the train left the station. Around 170 passengers were aboard the train as it departed from Prague on its 4-day journey, including 22 who were evacuated by Winton's trains in 1939. They took the opportunity to share their memories with family members. The train and its passengers were greeted by a crowd upon their arrival at London's Liverpool Street Station on September 4th. The mood was somber as it recalled that the very last train scheduled to leave Prague back in 1939 with more than 250 children was not allowed to leave the station. 70 years later, many of those who did survive were there at the ceremony. Sir Nicholas Winton himself, 100 years old, was also there to welcome them.
It's wonderful that it did work out so well, because after all, history could have made it very different. Anyway, it's wonderful to see you all after 70 years.
He's my lifesaver. He's like a father to me in that respect, because without him I wouldn't be here.
It's brought back the whole import of what was done at that time. And I'm only sorry my sister, who was with me on the first journey, isn't with me because she died quite young.
The 2009 train journey paid tribute to a remarkable achievement, the saving of 669 lives through the initiative of a single man.
And my guest today is Eve Slatner, who was one of those children on one of those trains. But you weren't actually at that ceremony in 2009.
I didn't go to that ceremony.
No, but you do know Sir Nicholas today.
Yes.
You know,
yes.
You have met him. Tell us about that. I mean, it must have been quite a moment to meet him. You know.
It was, because I went to the first Czech boarding school reunion, and I was looking at his book with a list of children that he saved, because I was looking for somebody that I'd known in boarding school, was madly in love with at the tender age of 5, and I'd been trying to find him, and his name is Schneider, and my name is Slatner, so we're very close to each other on the page. I saw that Schneider wasn't there, so I closed the book. So I never saw my name there. And Nicholas gave a cocktail party for all of his children. Because there were other children there who got out different ways, who had gone to the boarding school. So not everybody in boarding school was a Nicholas child. And somebody said to me, "Come on, Eve, you're invited to the cocktail party." And I said, "No, I'm not. I'm not one of Nicholas's children." And she said, "Of course you are. Come on." And I said, "Vera, believe me, I'm not one of his children." And she said, "Well, you looked at the book. Didn't you see your name?" And I said, "I didn't look for my name." She opened the book, and when I saw my name, suddenly that whole experience hit me. I used to say, yes, I came on the Kindertransport, but it was all in the head. I felt nothing. But when I saw my name there, she said she'll never forget it. I was all happy, and then suddenly I turned white. She thought I would faint. And of course, I went to the cocktail party, and it has a whole different meaning to me now, the Kindertransport, than it had before that.
Yeah. Yeah. And meeting him.
Yeah, and meeting him. And I was at his 100th birthday. And he is absolutely so with it.
Yeah.
He was making jokes. He's wonderful. He's really wonderful.
And a very, very modest man.
Very, very.
Who, if it wasn't for his wife,
Yes.
we would not know who'd been this saviour. Yeah. Let's get back to your personal story of after the war. 1947, I think you went to America.
Yes.
And you studied at the High School for Performing Arts.
Yes.
Now, this was the top play. I mean, was Marlon Brando there at the time? Or
No.
No.
I mean, he used to come around and date the students.
Oh, really?
But he wasn't studying there.
No, OK. And eventually, you came to Berlin in the 50s, as we've heard, but eventually you came back to Berlin in 1963, a married woman
Yes.
with Eckhart, and I believe you hated it.
I did.
What had happened?
Everything.
The wall
was up, and that was traumatic for me. Every time I went over to the East, people coming back, families that were separated between East and West, crying, hugging each other. It was terrible. But then the Berlin I had left in 58, there was hardly a car on the street. It still was really after the war. And in 63, cars everywhere, Wohlstand. And I guess when you're single and you're young and you're all alone, everybody's nice to you. When you're a married woman, people acted as though I had taken a German man away from them.
Really?
I mean, I can't tell you, it was really awful.
Uh-huh.
And
you both left the country. I mean, I think your husband, Dr. Eckhard Krippendorf,
Yes.
was one of what they call an 68er, a 1960. How do we explain that in English? A 68er, a sort of when there are the demonstrations and everything, very left wing, if you like. And he was. Did you both kind of have to leave the country? Well, you didn't have to leave the country, but did he?
He didn't have to leave the country.
No.
I wanted to leave the country.
Yeah.
After 5 years, I just couldn't take it anymore. And I said, look, the only place I can earn a living, I couldn't earn a living in Germany in those days. I tried to get into the opera. I sent every opera house in Germany, no matter how small, my CV. Only one answered, and that was Hamburg. And I sang for them, and they said, come back when you've had some more experience. I couldn't get in.
That's the tricky one, isn't it? Yes, I know, yes.
So...
we should actually, I want to show at this point, if the camera... keep talking, but if we can get a close-up of this, I'm afraid this you brought this in with you. This is a lovely photo, I think, of you. Not in the opera, but
no, it's,
even so.
with John Flynn. We did Facade in the Philharmonie, in the Kammermusiksaal in the Philharmonie.
Oh, right, here in Berlin.
Here in Berlin.
Yeah. It's a lovely photo. Thank you for that.
Thank you.
But you went to Italy.
No, we went. So I said to Eckhart, we have to go. I have to go back to New York. If you can come, great. If you can't come, I have to go. So I went, and when you're young, you're nuts. I thought I would live in a commune so that there would be more people to take care of the two children. and 68, you know, communes were sprouting up everywhere. And so I went, and I mean, we both decided to go. Eckhart managed to get a job at Queen's College. And
He's a professor of?
Political science.
Political science, okay, yeah.
And in the last minute, the Americans wouldn't give him a visa. And he said, go and see what you can do for me. So I went, and 5 years earlier, when I was still living in the States and working in the States, I had worked for Mrs. Roosevelt. So I had a few connections through Mrs. Roosevelt.
I think you did, yes. Mrs. Roosevelt, there's a name to bandy around.
You know,
yeah.
I was on the phone for days trying to get somebody in the State Department to give him a visa, and I managed it. So he came to the States. We spent a year in the States with the Damocles sword. When the year is up, we have to go back to Berlin. And I said to Eckhart, and by then it was very hard for left-wing, you know, Berufsverbot had started. Left-wingers couldn't be civil servants in Germany anymore. So I said, we've got to go to a country where nobody knows you, nobody knows me, start from scratch.
And that was Italy.
That was Italy. Yeah. That was a miracle, and it was wonderful.
And after Italy, because I'm sorry to cut you, but
That's okay.
You've had a long and exciting life, and we've got to only get bits of it because we want the wits in Germany. You came back to Germany in 1990 again.
Yes.
A very different Germany, a reunited Germany.
Yes.
So was this? You were talking about the horrors of the wall.
Yes.
So how was Germany when you came back in 1990? And you stayed ever since?
Yes. Well, in 1990, it was wonderful. Until it became Hauptstadt, it was fabulous.
Became the capital? What? Oh, really?
Yes.
You don't like it being the capital? No, why?
I mean, I still like Berlin, don't get me wrong. I think at this point in my life, I couldn't live anywhere else. But, of course, it's changed.
And not all to the good.
I think it sort of wants to see itself as another London, another Paris. Speculation is enormous. Rents are unpayable. Students can no longer find flats. Artists can't find flats. My son is an artist. The whole situation is terrible now. And in 90, and until it became, even after, you know, even the first few years that it was a capital, there were so many artists here. You know, young people, it was cheap. They could live here. You could get studio space.
But there was a lot of space because the wall had opened, you see, and things were... And I mean, fair enough, you're saying it's getting expensive, but it's still cheaper than most European capitals, isn't it?
Yes.
And it's still got lots of artists here.
Yes.
Yeah.
But there's also much less money here. The kind of rents that you pay in London, nobody could afford here.
Okay, yeah.
It's unbelievable, but I think I heard, don't quote me on the figures, a new building is going up, or is it in New York, but something like for 1.5 rooms, it's I don't know how many millions of pounds or dollars.
Yeah, I mean, it's going crazy. One thing you do like, I know, because in our questionnaire we asked you, is flea markets in Berlin.
I love them. I love them.
Why? Are you a hoarder? Do you like it, or do you just like wandering around?
I'm not a hoarder, and I'm absolutely not a shopper. I can't stand shopping. But the minute something is sold on the street or at a flea market, you cannot tear me away.
OK, well, you'll like this. Let's have a look at one very special flea market now here in Berlin. Just one of the many flea markets here in Berlin that you enjoy. That was what you put down as my favourite German place in our questionnaire. Do you remember what you put down as ingenious German invention?
I think I put down Daunendecken.
Which is duvet covers.
Duvet.
Now, are they a German invention? Because I did look.
I'm not sure if they're a German invention, but all the German-speaking countries have them. Yeah. You go to England, you're swaddled in with blankets, and the first thing you have to do is pull everything out. It's just, I can never sleep under blankets. And Duvets are just wonderful.
Yeah, they are indeed. I must admit, I can't find out who invented them. I could only find out that Thomas Nugent, an Englishman in the mid-18th century, wrote about them, saying there's one very particular thing to them. They do not cover themselves with bedclothes, but lay one feather bed over and another under. And he's talking about his visiting Germany.
Oh,
so
yes.
Yeah. Your favourite culinary achievement in Germany is sauerkraut.
Oh,
Is that...
I do love sauerkraut.
Yeah. OK. I want to ask you, though, we wouldn't mention your age, but people can work out that if you were on a Kindertransport in 1939, over the official age of retirement, I should say, but you haven't retired. You're still acting. You
never retire from acting. That's partly because, you know, the jobs come so few and far between that you can't really retire. No, and I'm glad to say I still... And still make films. Yes. Yeah. But you weren't involved in the film. There is a film called Nicky's Family about... No, I'm not. No, but that is about, if people want to find out more, that is about Sir Nicholas Winton. Yes. And what he did, and which we've been talking about. I want to show one final picture of your two prides and joy, I think. Yes, Philip and David. Yeah, these are your two sons. I wanted to ask you, now, are they German? Are they European? Are they American? What do you... I mean, how do they see themselves, do you think? Probably Italian. That is their mother tongue. Really? Because they went from kindergarten on... They spent most of their youth... In Italian schools. Until university, it was all Italian. And I think they would consider themselves Italian. Yeah. You have told them your story. Your parents and that generation didn't, you know, kept things in. Which do you think is the better strategy? Oh, definitely tell. Definitely. Yeah. There's no shadow of a doubt. They knew everything about me. Yeah. My past, my present, everything. We always talked at home. And do they both live in Germany? They both live in Berlin. Finally, we're all together. Yeah. And how do they feel about the past? And, I mean, do they feel... We've talked about the memorials we see all around town here, the wonderful way... I think you and I both think Germany have treated their past. Do you think your children... I mean, they're another generation, you know. Do they feel that's been well done too? I think they think that it was being well done. I'm worried about what's happening now. And not just in terms of anti-Semitism, but anti-Islam, anti-immigrants. There's a whole upsurge of a very nasty wave coming up. I mean... A right-wing wave, yes. Perhaps? The NSU. Yeah. It's almost more shocking what happened afterwards, how documents were shredded, how nobody really comes out and says anything, than the fact that these terrible murders took place. Yeah, these terrible neo-Nazi murders. Yeah. And, but I wouldn't like to end on a sad note. No. Are you hopeful for the future? Do you think this will be sorted? Well, I hate to end on a sad note. That might be sorted. I cannot say I'm hopeful for the future, globally. I'm afraid I'm not. I think if we don't get really the global warming halfway under control, if it is still possible, if we don't do something about this outrageous capitalism that just, where really nothing counts except money. We'll have to, our kids will have to do that for us. Eve Slatner, it has been a joy and wonderful to talk to you today. Thank you very much for being with us on Inside Germany. Thank you. Thank you for joining us, and that's it. Thanks for watching. See you again soon. Bye-bye.